Yo, what up? It's Roach here, back with another Final Monarchs daily video. It's been a little while since the last daily video, but trust me, you're in for a treat with this one. So the title says that this is a review, but it's not going to be like a regular review. What I'm going to do with this is not actually judge the game. I'm not going to give it like a score out of 10 or anything like that. I'm just going to kind of list pros and cons of the games that I noticed, and then let the viewer decide, which pro outweighs which con and all that stuff. I'm going to try to be unbiased, but I'll probably end up being biased sometimes. Just don't freak out about it, okay? So anyway, this review is on NieR Automata. Excuse me, you pronounced it automata? The correct pronunciation is automata. Like the plural of automaton.
I'm Francis Santos. I'm the product lead for NieR Automata.
Yoko Taro, the director of NieR Automata.
I know this game came out a little while ago, but I'm going to do the review anyway because I think it's worth doing a review on. I'll start with a performance overview. If you're not playing on PC, then you can skip this part. Overall, the port is okay. It has its problems, some pretty big problems, but you can get by with it. At least I could. I'll get back to that in a second. Looking at the settings, there's quite a few graphics options, which is more than I expected from a port. There's still a lot left out. The sound options are pretty much what you'd expect. There's not a whole lot of room to improve there. Keyboard mapping is again what you'd expect. All you're doing is changing what the different keys do. I don't see how you can make that much better. Controller mapping, however, exceeded my expectations. You can actually rebind every button on the controller to whatever you want. It is something you don't see in a lot of games, but definitely should be in every game. As you can see, I've got mine set up in a way that's similar to Dark Souls, but you can do whatever you want with it. You can bind every button to the same command. You can unbind all the buttons and just play the game with no interface whatsoever. You can do whatever, It's your dream. Going back to the performance, if you're okay with playing 1080p at sub 60 FPS, then you can probably get by. If you want to play above 1080p at 60 FPS, then you're probably going to need mods. If you really don't want to use mods, there's several things you can do. The most important being turning off anti-aliasing. This helps FPS quite a bit. If you do this, you'll want to leave on ambient occlusion though, unless you're just absolutely desperate for frames. The game's gonna look really bad with no aliasing. There's also some major stuttering during cutscenes. There's really no excuse for this, and I couldn't find any way in the settings to fix it. There's some weird upscaling at high resolutions. I play at 2K for example, and it was like the game downscaled from 2K to 1080p and then upscaled it back, and it made everything super fuzzy, and it's just really a weird issue to have in general. The Fix Automata Resolution mod fixes pretty much all these problems. Definitely fixed the upscaling for me, increased performance in general. There's also a 60 FPS lock on the game and a 30 FPS lock on the cutscenes. This was pretty jarring to me, to be honest, at least at first. Transitioning from 60 FPS gameplay to a 30 FPS cutscene, I definitely noticed it. Maybe you won't. As far as I know, you can't unlock the cutscene FPS, but you can unlock the gameplay FPS. However, this will cause some really weird engine issues. For example, there are some parts in the story where you can't progress if you're above 60 FPS. You could always cap it, progress past that point, and then uncap it again, but I would just recommend waiting until after you beat the game to uncap it, if you want to at all. The basic gist of this section is that you should download the Fixed Automata Resolution mod. It's, I would say, necessary to play the game. First thing I want to say about the gameplay is that I highly recommend a controller. This is just one of those games where a keyboard and mouse doesn't translate well. I also recommend turning off vertical auto adjust. That's just kind of a personal thing though. I didn't like how close the camera was to the ground, and it was really annoying having it auto adjust back every time I changed it. All in all, the combat is very good for a slasher, but it's still just a slasher. There's not any in-depth swordplay, blocking, parrying, that sort of thing. However, attacks do feel very heavy. When your character swings a greatsword, it really feels like there's a lot of weight behind it. Animations are outstanding, and because of this, the combat flows very well. Really, the animations in general are just very well done. Little things like leaning to the side when turning and tripping over uneven surfaces, and the little idle animations they do when you don't move for a while. Sometimes your character will flip when jumping over something, but sometimes they won't. So it adds a nice little variety of movement and makes them feel like an actual character, opposed to just something you control to get through the game. There's a good amount of weapons and a lot of variety, but they don't actually feel that different. It seems like no matter what weapon you use, you just kind of run up to the enemy and do your combos, and it does pretty much the same amount of damage. You can equip any kind of weapon for any kind of enemy and you'll have similar results. The exception, I would say, would be great swords. Obviously they're a lot slower, but it still kind of applies depending on what else you have equipped. This is unlike Dark Souls, where different weapons have very different movesets and affect enemies in very different ways. I hate to keep comparing things to Dark Souls, but one of the things I absolutely love about it is how the hitboxes of the weapons are so precise and the movesets are so varied that sometimes aiming directly at the enemy is not what you want to do. If you aim off to the side, maybe you'll swing and hit 2 or 3 enemies at once just because of where the hitboxes of the weapons are. These are just something you don't really see in Automata. You can obviously hit more than one enemy at the same time, but it's just not as in-depth as Dark Souls. There are chips you can equip which add a lot of depth to the combat. Since you can't level up, you don't really get to pick what your character specializes in that way, but you can use the chips to do this. For example, you can use these to up your defense and be kind of a damage sponge close range kind of player, or you can up your attack and be like a ranged glass cannon type thing. A good chipset can really make or break you depending on what difficulty you're on. Speaking of difficulty, there are massive gaps in difficulty in this game. Easy is you have to actively try to die. Normal is what easy should be. Hard is pretty big step up from normal, and very hard means that the prologue is virtually impossible. Obviously I'm exaggerating. If you know what you're doing, you can play hard and very hard and still get through pretty well. The problem is if you don't know what you're doing and you're playing it for the first time, normal is probably going to seem too easy and hard is going to seem too hard. Another downside to the difficulty is that enemies don't scale with you, they scale with the story. This means that if you spend a lot of time at the beginning leveling up and grinding, the rest of the game will be incredibly easy because you'll outlevel everything you see. This is also very apparent after you beat the game and you go back and play earlier levels. You will crush everything you see because they'll all be level 1 and you'll be like level 70 to 100. This section is less of a review and more of an explanation. I can't review the story without spoilers, so instead I'm just going to kind of explain how the story works. Again, this will not spoil anything. First thing to note is that this isn't just some anime slasher about sexy androids. Actually, it sort of is. But the story is the most important aspect of the game. It's very obvious that the game was made to tell a story and not the story made around a game. If you don't play games for the story, then this game is not for you. So the way that it works is that the story is split up into 3 routes and 26 endings. 5 of them are actual serious endings, and the rest are jokes or non-canon. Yep, we can argue about the canon for thousands of fucking years, but please don't. I actually might make a video about which major endings I think are the canon, but I'm not going to do that in this video, so back off. Speaking of the joke endings, they can destroy hours of progress if you don't save. This game has no autosave, so you have to save often. Otherwise you might accidentally run into a joke ending and it will delete everything that's happened since you last saved. Most of the time they're really obviously coming, but some of them can sneak up on you, and it really sucks to have a lot of stuff deleted because of it. You can get every single ending in the same playthrough. The only one that I know of that's missable is ending Y, and when I say missable, I mean that if you don't get it, you'll have to start a new save file in order to get it. Other than that, I think all of them are pretty open to when you can get them. So to the explanation of the actual story, Route A is the first half of the story, if not less. Don't be that guy that writes a professional review on the entire game after only playing Route A. Routes B and C are set up in a way that's similar to New Game Plus and other games. Like after you finish Route A, you watch the credits, and then afterwards you keep playing and it's Route B. Route B is mostly the same as Route A, but from a different perspective. Route C is actually the second half of the game, and it is incredibly depressing. I'm not going to go into detail why, but if you need some kind of trigger warning, there you go. Now a lot of people are like me, and they'll beat Route A and think, okay, yeah, that was pretty good, but it wasn't really enough content. If you're that person, just keep playing. It ended up taking me like 30 hours to beat the main story, not including side quests. Speaking of side quests, the main storyline is definitely enough. You'll get the concepts that Yoko's trying to tell you about, but you won't get the full experience. If you don't want to do all of them, there's a Reddit post in the description that talks about which ones you absolutely should do. Roach, you used Reddit. I thought you hated Reddit. Another thing to note about the story is that it is way better if you've played the original NieR. Even better if you played the original NieR when it came out in 2010. If you haven't played it and you don't plan to, at least read or watch a summary of the story. There's certain side quests and characters that'll be much more meaningful if you know the story of the original. The first thing I'm going to say about the soundtrack is that I hope I don't get a copyright strike for using it in this video. If I do more reviews, most of them aren't going to have an entire section dedicated to the soundtrack. In fact, with this review I had the soundtrack and the story put into the same section, but I decided to split it up at the last minute. Honestly, the soundtrack of this game is much more important than it is in most other games. Probably one of the most obvious things about it is that it is a masterpiece. It's very obvious that a lot of care and effort went into making it, especially when you consider that most of the lyrics are in a language that was made up just for the game. The soundtrack is really what makes the story work. The story is fine on its own, but the songs give it so much more emotion and feeling. It makes each area seem so much more memorable. I know I'm biased because this is one of my favorite areas, but I'll never forget walking into the amusement park for the first time and hearing how the soundtrack mixed and changed as you go deeper into the area. It just adds so much more depth to each area and makes them seem way bigger than they actually are, and that's something that I haven't seen in a game in a really long time. Speaking of how the music mixes and changes as you go, this is a very big aspect with ending E. I'm not going to go into detail because in my opinion that's the most important ending not to be spoiled on. With that being said, I'm going to give a little advice. Make sure you pay really close attention to what it's asking you, because it's not joking. Hopefully this will be enough advice for you not to have to look it up later. Because like I said, that is a very important part of the game to not be spoiled on. It takes away from so much impact of it if you already know what's going to happen. If it wasn't obvious already, I really liked this game. I hope I wasn't too biased. The game is definitely not for everyone, and if you don't care about stories, then the game will be mediocre at best. It's really more of a piece of art than a game. If you don't buy into that, then you won't like it, and there's really nothing wrong with that. Some people just play games for the fun and don't want to get emotionally invested in it. Like I said, Automata is a little bit lacking in gameplay, but it more than makes up for it in my opinion with its story and soundtrack and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. Kind of a different tone than usual. Usually I'm like the sarcastic, cynical asshole type character. This time I'm trying to be a little more serious with the review. I don't know. I might end up doing more of them, might not. Depends on what the finished product looks like. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. That's pretty much the end of the video. I'm gonna do a little meta channel update, but if you don't really care about that, then don't watch it. It's not necessary. So yeah, as I kind of mentioned earlier, videos are obviously not coming out as frequently as they used to. I've been dealing with a lot of stuff recently and it's honestly killed my motivation to do anything. That being said, I really love doing these videos. I have a lot of fun recording them and editing them and making the thumbnail and all that stuff. Making this video has made me realize that I need to do it more often, not just for the sake of uploading to the channel, but also for my sake. I don't want this to get too personal. I really hate talking about myself. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I'm not done making videos. I don't think I'll ever really be done. I don't plan on ever stopping now. I know I don't get a lot of views, but that's really not the reason I do it. I mean, obviously I'd love to have millions of views and subscribers and all that, but that's not the point. The point is that I really enjoy doing it. I'd really love to expand the videos into more than just gaming, maybe do some live skits or something like that, but that'll probably be a little ways off. I'm kind of just rambling now. Basically what I wanted to say is that I'm not done making videos. Well, that's pretty much all I had to say. See ya.